September 13th, 1598. In El Escorial Palace, Madrid, a 52-year-old treasury official named Juan de Ibarra sits before a ledger that should be impossible. Spain controls the largest empire in human history. Its galleons have spent 80 years extracting silver from the mines of Potosí in Bolivia, a mountain so rich that the Spanish coined a phrase still used today, worth a Potosí. The silver that flowed from that single mountain between 1545 and 1650 exceeded the entire existing silver supply of Europe at the time of its discovery. And Juan de Ibarra is looking at a bankruptcy notice. Spain has just defaulted on its sovereign debt for the third time in 40 years. Its army in the Netherlands hasn't been paid in 6 months. Its navy, the most powerful ever assembled, has been rebuilt twice after catastrophic losses, funded entirely by silver that was already pledged to Genoese bankers before it left the Americas. The most resource-rich empire on Earth is simultaneously the most indebted state in Europe. 426 years later, a kingdom sitting above the largest conventional oil reserve on Earth is looking at its own version of Juan de Ibarra's ledger. The numbers are different. The mechanism is identical. Stay with me. To understand what happened to Spain and why it is the most important economic cautionary tale in history, you first have to understand what Potosí actually was, because the textbook version gets the lesson exactly backwards. Most people learn that Spain squandered its silver, that the Spanish were lazy or corrupt or simply unlucky, that the resource curse is a cultural failure, a character flaw that produces bad institutions and poor decisions. That framing is wrong. And it is wrong in a way that makes the Saudi parallel invisible if you accept it. Spain did not fail because it squandered its silver. Spain failed because the silver was too abundant. The mechanism was not waste, it was distortion. When silver flooded into the Spanish economy in quantities that dwarfed any productive economic activity, it did three things simultaneously that individually looked like prosperity and collectively produced collapse. First, it caused inflation. The price revolution of the 16th century hit Spain first and hardest, because the silver entered the economy through Spanish ports before distributing outward. Spanish manufactured goods became uncompetitive against imports. Why build a textile industry when silver can simply purchase Flemish cloth? Why develop agriculture when silver can purchase Moroccan grain? The resource didn't supplement the productive economy. It replaced it. Second, it created rentier psychology. The Spanish crown, its nobility, and eventually its merchant class learned that wealth came from controlling the extraction and distribution of silver, not from creating value through manufacturing, agriculture, or trade. The economic culture reorganized itself around the resource. Productive industries atrophied because silver made them unnecessary. The skills, the institutions, the social habits of a productive economy were not developed because they were never needed. Third, it produced military overextension financed by future silver. The Spanish crown, confident that Potosí's silver would continue indefinitely, borrowed against future production to finance present wars. The Genoese banking families who financed Spain's armies held claims on silver that hadn't been mined yet. When production slowed, as it inevitably did as the richest seams were exhausted, the debt structure built on infinite silver projections met finite silver reality. The defaults followed as mechanically as compound interest. This is the resource curse, not a cultural failure, a structural trap. Now here is Saudi Arabia. And I want you to watch the mechanism, not the surface similarities, but the precise structural sequence, because it replicates Spain's not as metaphor, but as mechanism. Saudi Arabia sits above approximately 260 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, roughly 17% of the world's total. Since the 1973 oil embargo transformed the kingdom from a regional power into a global financial force, oil revenues have financed everything. The welfare state, the infrastructure, the military, the royal family's consumption, and the diplomatic relationships that give Saudi Arabia its geopolitical weight. At peak oil prices, Saudi Arabia collected revenues that made economic development a choice rather than a necessity. Why build a manufacturing sector when oil revenues can import everything? Why develop a knowledge economy when petrodollars can hire the expertise you need? Why create the institutions, the habits, and the social infrastructure of a productive economy when the ground produces sufficient wealth without them? The Spanish crown asked the same questions. The answers, in both cases, were rational in the short term and catastrophic in the long term. Here's the number that matters. Saudi Arabia's break-even oil price, the price per barrel at which the kingdom can balance its budget without drawing down reserves, is approximately $80 to $96 per barrel depending on the year and the estimate used. That number has risen steadily for 2 decades as the welfare state expanded, as the military budget grew, and as the patronage networks that maintained political stability consumed an increasing share of oil revenues. In 1998, exactly 400 years after Juan de Ibarra's bankruptcy notice, oil fell to $10 per barrel. Saudi Arabia ran a deficit equivalent to 13% of GDP. In 2015-2016, oil fell to $30. Saudi Arabia burned through $115 billion in foreign reserves in 18 months. The kingdom that had lectured the world about fiscal prudence was drawing down its sovereign wealth fund at a rate that alarmed even its own finance ministry. This is Spain in 1557, the first default. Recoverable, in isolation, the signal of a structural problem that is not being addressed. Here's the critical part. Vision 2030, and why it is simultaneously the right diagnosis and the wrong medicine administered too late. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman launched Vision 2030 in 2016 with a diagnosis that was admirably direct. Saudi Arabia is addicted to oil. It needs to diversify its economy, develop its private sector, reduce its dependence on oil revenues, and create the productive economic institutions that petrodollar wealth made unnecessary. The diagnosis was correct. The ambition was genuine. But here is what Spain attempted in the 1560s and 1570s, decades before its final collapse, that Vision 2030 structurally resembles. The Duke of Alba and Philip II's finance ministers understood perfectly well that Spain's dependence on American silver was creating the distortions that threatened long-term stability. They proposed reforms, develop Castilian manufacturing, reduce military expenditure, build domestic productive capacity. The proposals were detailed, well-reasoned, and largely implemented on paper. The implementation failed not because the Spanish were stupid or corrupt, though corruption existed. It failed because the reform required the economy to accept short-term pain, reduced consumption, lower wages relative to import prices, the development of industries that couldn't initially compete against established European producers, at the precise moment when silver revenues made that pain politically unnecessary and therefore politically unacceptable. Why would a Spanish wool merchant invest in improving productivity when silver-financed imports were cheaper than anything domestic production could achieve? Why would a Spanish craftsman accept lower wages to compete internationally when the domestic market was floated on silver spending? The reform required the economy to behave as if the silver weren't there, while the silver was there. Vision 2030 faces the identical structural paradox. Saudi Arabia is attempting to build a private sector, develop tourism, create entertainment industries, and attract foreign investment, while simultaneously maintaining the oil revenue-financed welfare state, the subsidized energy prices, the government employment guarantees, and the patronage networks that make political stability possible. The reform requires the economy to develop the habits and institutions of a productive system while the oil continues to make those habits and institutions economically unnecessary. Neom, the $500 billion futuristic city project, is being built with oil revenues. The entertainment sector being developed to diversify away from oil is being subsidized with oil revenues. The foreign talent being attracted to build a knowledge economy is being paid with oil revenues. The reform is oil-financed. The addiction is financing its own cure. Spain tried the same pharmaceutical in the 1570s. The silver financed the reforms designed to reduce silver dependence. The silver made the reforms unnecessary urgently enough to be implemented with genuine structural commitment. Here is the dimension that makes the Saudi position structurally worse than Spain's. The timeline that Spain didn't have to confront, but Saudi Arabia must. Spain's silver ran out slowly. Potosí's production declined over decades as the richest seams were exhausted. The Spanish crown had, in theory, time to adjust. Time it did not use productively, but time nonetheless. The resource depletion was gradual enough that each generation could reasonably tell itself that the next generation would face the real reckoning. Saudi Arabia's oil will not run out. It will become uneconomic before it runs out. The energy transition, whatever its pace, whatever its ultimate scope, is already affecting the long-term demand projections that Saudi Aramco uses to plan its investment horizon. The International Energy Agency projects peak oil demand somewhere between 2025 and 2030, depending on policy scenarios. After peak demand, the question for oil-dependent states is not whether revenues will fall, but how fast. Saudi Arabia's 260 billion barrels of reserves are worth precisely what the global economy is willing to pay for oil over the extraction period. If that period shortens, because demand peaks and declines, the net present value of those reserves falls. Not because the oil disappears, but because the market for it contracts. Spain's silver became worthless when the mines were exhausted and no new mines were found. Saudi Arabia's oil risks becoming uneconomic while still in the ground. The mechanism is different. The outcome for a state that built its entire economic architecture on infinite resource revenues is identical. And the break-even price, already $80 to $96, will continue rising as Vision 2030's infrastructure investments add to fiscal commitments that oil revenues must service. The gap between what the kingdom needs from oil and what the market will sustainably provide is narrowing, not in decades, in years. Here is what Spain looked like in its final chapter. the decades after the last sustainable silver revenues, because it is the clearest picture of what a resource curse looks like when the resource finally fails the architecture built upon it. Spain maintained the form of empire for a century after the substance was gone. Its army still marched. Its diplomats still negotiated as if Madrid were the center of the world. Its court maintained the ceremonial magnificence of a global power. The form outlasted the substance because the form was all that remained of the identity that silver had built. The productive economy that silver had replaced never developed. The institutions, the habits, the social capital of a competitive economic system, absent for 3 generations of silver wealth, could not be rebuilt in a decade of austerity. The skills were gone. The industries were gone. The cultural orientation toward productive work had been replaced, over generations, by orientation toward resource extraction and state patronage. Spain spent the 17th century as a diminishing power maintained by momentum and the political inconvenience of its formal collapse to its creditors. It was not a dramatic fall. It was a long, slow, structurally inevitable reduction to a regional power, a country that had briefly touched global dominance and then retreated to its geography. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 exists precisely to prevent that trajectory. The diagnosis is correct. The urgency is real. Mohammed bin Salman understands, with clarity, what Juan de Ibarra understood too late. The question is not whether Saudi Arabia's leadership understands the resource curse. They do. The question is whether understanding a structural trap is sufficient to escape it, or whether the oil, like the silver, finances the reform just long enough to make the reform feel achievable until the day it doesn't. This channel exists to find the mechanism before the momentum runs out. Spain knew it was in trouble in 1575. It had 80 more years of managed decline before the form finally matched the substance. The question for Saudi Arabia is not whether the mechanism is running. It is whether Vision 2030 is the reform that broke the resource curse, or the most sophisticated version of the silver-financed reform that every resource-dependent state has attempted and none has completed. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing the historical pattern operating inside current events. And I want your argument in the comments. Has any major oil-dependent state in history successfully diversified its economy away from resource dependence before the resource peaked? Or does the resource always make the reform feel less urgent than it is? Drop your argument below. The clearest one gets pinned.